We are often our own demise, and I am becoming procrastination. Like, you are so often so wrong about you and you don't even know it. You've self-identified as particle board, paper mache, duct taped, and you are wrong and right and confused. It's complicated, but so is a star, a flower, a quasar, a friendship, a marriage. May we be refuge for the complicated. And as for me, well, I have zipped up my emotions into this dusty duffel bag that I've aptly named poetry. And I'll be on my merry way soon as my pride turns me loose and unmangle the last morsel of manhood I can produce. Ma'am, I seem to have misplaced my confidence. Last place I seen it was at the altar of your love, and it's complicated. And I am becoming complicated. And we may scratch ourselves raw to try to erase the image we were made in. Smoke, snort, sex, or drown out the silence. We may waste our life savings on makeovers to try to rhinoplast our daddy's nose away, but no nip, no tuck could cut away the sense of obligation. We are becoming what we're not, and what we are is inescapable. You are a masterpiece, and you're fighting to be a silly selfie with a hideous filter. You are heaven's handmade calligraphy, and you're slumming it among papyrus fonts. You are the complete and perfect works of a perfect and eternal poet laureate with a laundry list of identity issues. And sometimes your plumbing doesn't match your urges, but your femininity, it forced the force field that protected our posterity. Your masculinity, it mustered up moxie to conquer mountains for our families. You are the rightful heirs to not just a kingdom, but a universe. And you got your daddy's eyes. Stop being so traitorous. You are revelation revealed, pyramid constructors, conductors, conduits of lightning, yet you speak and you breathe this arsenic carcinogenics, and it causes car sickness. But these scars are our witness. To love hard is hard living, but it's life. It's who we are. It's messy and uncomfortable and complicated, but so is a star. In parenting, in childbirth, in love, in us, in us. It's the end. Thank you. I want to present to you a concept called intersectionality. But before I do that, Kendrick Lamar last week released an album, his fourth major label release that probably sealed him as the greatest rapper of his generation. Now, not every generation, but of his generation, right? But that's not the interesting part of this story to me. The interesting part is the subplot that's happening, right? And the subplot that's happening is something that made him find himself finding something very seriously in common with an unlikely person. That person would be President Donald Trump. What does Kendrick Lamar and Donald Trump have in common? It's complicated. Intersectionality was first coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She's the expert in something called critical race theory, right? And its textbook definition would be like, this is the study of how overlapping or intersecting social identities, particularly minority identities, relate to systems and structures of oppression, domination, or discrimination. Now, let me try to put some skin on that. In case you haven't noticed, I'm black. But I'm also a father of 2 girls, pray for me, right? I see, sometimes when I'm with my daughters, I see people say, hey man, your daughters are gorgeous. You're in trouble, man. You better get yourself a gun. Hey, how about you raise your sons to respect women, huh? How about that? They don't have to kill nobody. Patriarchy much? So I'm a husband, I'm a father, but I'm also the son. I'm the son of a woman, duh. But I'm the son of specifically a black woman. right, who got her rights in the 1960s. But if history tells me what I thought it told me, I thought the women's suffrage movement happened decades before that. But because if you understand history, the women's suffrage movement wasn't for women. It was for white women, which is why a couple hundred years later, when we had our Women's March at the beginning of this year, where all kinds of people from all walks of life was flooding our streets, there was some problematic moments in there because a lot of these women were saying, yo, where were y'all when us undocumented women were getting our children snatched from us? Where were y'all when our sons were washing up on the shore in the Middle East? Where were y'all when black women were weeping, watching their sons being murdered in the street? When you don't understand your intersections, things can get very messy. Oh, it got quiet on me. So what does Kendrick Lamar and Donald Trump have in common? They introduced something that existed in the fringes. They brought it to the pop culture. What Kendrick Lamar did on his album, he introduced a street religion, if you will, called the Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, I know most of y'all don't know what that is, but what it is this: it's this concept that was kind of birthed out of a need to sort of affirm a black narrative. And basically the crux of it is the belief that blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans are actually the true Israelites. We're the true children of Israel, and the suffering that we're going through is because, according to Deuteronomy, we walked away from God's precepts. So until we start following the Ten Commandments, we're gonna keep seeing the suffering that we're seeing, right? That's the Black Hebrew Israelites. And in some senses, there's a lot of problems with that. In other senses, I understand. If you don't see your narrative being affirmed within the church for which you exist in, you're gonna try to find a way to affirm your narrative, right? There's nothing wrong with the book, but whatever y'all are doing, don't say what that's saying, right? Was kind of what was happening there, right? And of course, there's some other problematic things, especially if you start parsing out the difference between a Mesoamerican and a Native American. That means you bought the narrative of the colonizer who drew a border in between Texas and Mexico. That's just who bought this. They're the same people. So there's that problem, right? Ultimately, what we're talking about is a way to take black and make it an identity. Now, what did Donald Trump do? Well, he kind of did the same thing. He just did it with nationalism. He stood on the stage and he said, look, either we're a nation or we're not a nation. Either we got a border or we ain't got borders. Either we take care of their kids or we taking care of our kids. Which one you want, right? Which was essentially what he was saying. And the alt-right was like, you know what? You are absolutely correct. Either we're people or we're not a people. What is American? They knew what their subtext was, because the subtext says, for me to understand what American is, I have to understand where America came from. And what they're saying is our European ancestors came here to create a world for them, by them, right? Clearly, if you understand the trajectory of the next 300 years, they ain't have inclusiveness in mind. They knew exactly who they was building this world for. Oh, they got quiet on me again. They knew exactly who they were making this world for. So when they say, hey, so when somebody says, hey, we're a nation of immigrants, they go, I call BS. And you know what? They're right. This nation was meant for their own people. That's why we've been fighting for the last 300 years to try to get included, right? Right? The only problem with their definition of white is it's too broad according to their ancestors, because they wasn't talking about white people. They was like, no, specifically this part of the UK. Even the Irish, for crying out loud. You're on the same landmass. This is the northern part of your island. What's wrong with you? Right? So anyway. But it created this concept of whiteness. And now whiteness has an identity. And the second something has an identity, now it has to have agency, right? But how do we move from an identity to being intersectional? That means we have to understand what intersectional says. What intersectional says is this. Now, if you're the believer, what it says is this. It says that every time I take communion, I'm reminded that I was once undocumented too. What it says is this. I sit in Southern California, the best state in the world. You could sue me, I don't care. I sit in Long Beach, California, and I look at Standing Rock, and I say, you know what? I am suffering and crushed under the same systemic pressures and oppression that created that system. And I also benefit from it because I know I'm standing on Native American soil. I look at the same misogyny and patriarchy that my PhD wife, my wife's a doctor. She still gets emails saying, hey, Alma, I was wondering about, I'm like, time out. Dr. Zaragoza Petty. Don't call my wife Alma. You understand what I'm saying? It's patriarchy. You understand what I'm saying? I understand that I am crushed under that same system because that same system set up the white supremacy that I'm still trying to fight. However, I still benefit from that system from my maleness. It's intersectional. Now, how do I move from intersectional to ally, which is what I believe we're actually called to? How do I move from intersectional to ally and then to advocate? Well, I got 3 suggestions for y'all, and I got a minute and a half to give it to you. One thing is, I gotta throw out the concept of us versus them, that they the problem, because they is us. We talk about culture like it's just this thing up in the mountains, like it's us, right? We have to throw that idea. We have to throw out the idea that we are the sole purveyors of suffering, and don't nobody else suffer like I suffer. So I can't go march for those folk because, you know, Black Lives Matter. They do matter, but if I understand that the same systems set their problem up, then what I can do is I don't have to be the sole purveyor of suffering, because when I do that, when I stand on my own island and I say I'm the only one that got problems, what it does is it undermines all of our works of justice. I need to understand that if they free, I'm free. I need to also understand that I'm not also the sole provider of solutions, meaning if you raising money for your thing, that don't mean it's a zero-sum total game. Just because you working in sex trafficking don't mean I'm not working in the school to prison pipeline. We working on the same things. It's intersectional. I need to resist the temptation to believe that my cause is the only cause. And then finally, I need to understand that unity is not uniformity. We're not called to sameness. We're called to oneness. You move from understanding your intersections to becoming an ally. Thank you, guys.